Today we're going to take a look at lubricants and how they might be enhanced through the use of a boundary lubricant. Lubricants, generally speaking, are designed to keep moving metal parts from rubbing on each other. So what we have today is a Timken bearing tester, and it's designed simply to cause wear, and then we can observe it more easily than we can in the real world. And what we're going to be doing is dragging this bearing here on this race and creating friction, and then seeing how that friction is handled by different lubricants. So to begin with, I want to make sure that the surface is clean. This is something you don't always do on your bearing surface, but I'm taking some 80 grit sandpaper just to make sure that surface is as clean as I can get it before we start. In other words, we're zeroing out the Timken bearing tester. Then I rotate the bearing to a clean surface so that when we drag it, everything is clean. So we begin by placing the bearings so they're touching one another and stacking weights on this, and through leverage we're creating an extreme amount of pressure. At some point it'll lock out. There it has. It's locked up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weights. So that's zero as far as this machine goes, and we've created some wear on this Timken roller bearing that would demonstrate what wear looks like on this unit. So now let's try some oil. Let's put a crankcase underneath. Let's find some good oil, highly recommended, just 10W30 Mobile, brand new bottle. You'll hear it click when I open it up. We'll fill up the crankcase so the surface is being well lubricated. Well wished our camshaft lobes with it being that well lubricated. So now we will turn our bearing surface to a new clean spot. And taking these weights off, we do have to put them back on, but the oil gets no credit for those weights because it held that many with nothing. And so we're really interested in, after we leave this back on, how many more weights will it hold given this Mobile 1 oil we're testing. The answer seems to be 1. We've got one more weight before it locked up. And here's our wear surface again. Comparing the two, you can see they're pretty comparable. Now let's try and see if we could fix that situation by using Power Up with the Mobile 1. Power Up is basically a boundary lubricant. You put in 1 ounce per quart of Power Up with your existing lubricant. We now have it being well lubricated, and we're turning the bearing to a new surface again, locking it in place. And again, the Power Up doesn't get any credit for these because it held that many with the Mobile 1. We're again interested in how many more will come off that now that we've treated the Mobile 1 with Power Up. Notice it's a tie so far. I have put them on with a little more vigor called shock loading. Essentially, Mobile 1 only used 1 oil. As soon as I put one more weight on here, I've doubled the capacity of the oil to handle additional weights. If I put a second one on, it's now 3 times. As I go, I'll count. It's now 4 times better, 5 times better, 6 times better, 7 times better, 8 times better, 9 times better, 10 times better. For many, having something become 10 times better would be a good deal. Let's just see how much further we can go. I'd like to see it be 20 times better. We're now 11. 11 times. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 times better, and it still seems to be running just fine. There's no squeaking. Although I would like to have you believe it's 20 times better, I ran out of weights. I'm going to have to try and talk you into it being 20 times better. If we take this off and we look at the wear scar, and it's the same size as the other ones, I'm stuck with only making it 16 times better. But if the wear scar was half the size of the other ones, then maybe I could talk you into being 20 times better because it didn't do near the wear. Let's look. And see what this wear scar looks like. I think you can see yourself that it's well under half as big as the previous wear scars were. And so with some logic I would say we've now made the lubricant 20 times better. But not everything that can happen to a lubricant has happened so far. Let's see if we can stress out this situation even more. There are times when the lubricant will disappear on you. You can pick up a rock in an oil pan. Or some other event. Somebody doesn't screw in the drain plug completely. Somebody doesn't check the oil very often and it burns a little oil. But at some point you might find that you're running with anywhere from less than ideal oil to perhaps none at all. Would you like to have that protection? So far we have exhibited that we're protecting it against high stress. This is putting 150,000 psi at that point right now. And we demonstrated it can resist shock loading. As you notice, I was throwing each weight on there. Now a question might say, well, how does it handle high temperatures? If you'll notice, there's a little bit of smoke coming off there right now. Just about the operating temperature you want all of your bearings to be running at, I'm sure. Just have a little bit of smoke coming off of it. So the question might be asked, how does it do in high temperature situations? I think you can see that it's doing pretty well. If this was an internal combustion engine running without oil and it was getting this hot, something will happen to the heads. For example, they'll begin to get extremely hot and warp or crack. As soon as that begins to happen, some green stuff comes into the oil and mixes with it, called severe contamination. What is that stuff? How about antifreeze? Let's start to put some antifreeze in and see how this new reinforced Mobil 1 oil can handle severe contamination. It's plenty hot. We now have the crankcase filled up mostly, at least 95% antifreeze. Generally thought to be not a very good lubricant. Although it did quench the smoke, there seems to be no apparent loss in lubricity. And our Timken bearing is handling it just fine. Let's take a look, not because it's about to crash, but just because of curiosity. How big is our wear scar now? Let me show you. Hasn't grown very much at all, still under 50% the size of the previous wear scars that we've had. What else can we do to oil? We've looked at 4 different types of wear. High stress, shock loading, severe contamination of the oil, high temperatures, and there's one more. In fact, the one more causes more wear in the United States than almost any other ones we've seen so far. What is that? Cold start wear. Now, cold start implies simply not how cold it is, but the fact that an engine begins moving with absolutely no lubricant on it because the lubricant has disappeared. So I'll take a clean rag and wipe out all the lubricant from around the Timken bearing. So we have no lubricant left. take another spot and make sure there's no lubricant anyplace around the roller bearing. So now they represent a dryness normally associated with cold starts. Let's take the weights off so that we're back to the stage where the oil could just barely handle it. That apparently is all the stress that's being caused in the engine currently today, or else your oil wouldn't allow it to even drive down the road. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weights. That's as many as the oil could hold by itself plus 1. So let's put this back on. What we're looking for now is for this to survive. Remember that this caused a complete crash when we used Mobile 1 all by itself. We're hoping that we can get 3 or 4 or 5 seconds of this operating in a quiet mode before it locks up, simulating the fact that it would take hardly more than a couple seconds for oil to recirculate in most engines at startup. 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000, 6 1000, 7 1000, 8 1000, 9 1000, 10 1000, 11 1000, 12 1000. Certainly by now we would have expected the oil to be circulating in that engine. It did lock up, and so we have some additional wear. What might we do to see if we could get it running again? How much oil would it take to activate that? There's been a little bit of oil dripping here on this towel down this face. Let's use that amount of oil and put back on the surface, representing the first splash of oil from an engine fresh off of a cold start. Let's put the bearing back on and see if that first speck of oil will again offer the protection we've had in the past. It seems to be doing so. So we can say also, power up, when added to this Mobile 1, even answers the problem associated with cold start wear. In fact, it seems to be running so well, let's see if we can get all the weights back on. And certainly you'll agree with me that I did not over-lube it this time. I just put a very small amount on there. And yet, it's back to running just fine. No oil. Just that very little bit of oil I found on the surface here that was dripping down. Actually, oil-water mix. I think you can see then that using power up in your oil solves all 5 typical wear situations. Extreme pressure, shock loading, high temperature, severe contamination, and finally cold start wear. Let's take a look at another type of lubricant, that's grease. We'll do the same tests that can be done with the oils, and we'll start out by finding out how much this tip and bearing test machine can withstand without any lubricant whatsoever. In other words, we're zeroing out this wear machine. So we place the tip and roller on the race, and we get a stack weights. You can see at 4, it locks it out. And we have a wear scar here that represents wear on a dry surface. We'll now add some grease. The grease I've just chosen to demonstrate is Amsoil grease. It's a synthetic grease. If you read on the label, it's supposed to be a grease designed for extreme pressure situations. Sometimes grease has a tendency to separate, so I'm purposely stirring it up down in there so I can get, quote unquote, the good grease on the end of the screwdriver. This is not an ideal grease surface or grease fitting, but as long as I can get some grease in the same place that the wear is likely to occur, it'll be adequate for our demonstration. And so the fitting is now greased. I roll the bearing over to a fresh surface. We take off the weights because the grease do not get credit for these 4 weights because it held that much with nothing. I now put the bearing in place, and we begin to stack the weights, and we're interested in how many weights this grease will hold over and above the 0 point. answer is we've just barely got the same number of fitting of grease on it before it will get locked up. You can see the wear scar is just about the same as it was. We'll now turn to the new surface. Take off the AMSOIL grease as best we can. Then we'll try some of Power Up sticks of grease. Assuming a brand new tube that it might not have settled, we won't go down very deep and stir it all up. We'll just take off an amount that seems to be adequate to get stuck on that surface again. I think you can say that I haven't used more grease in this case than I did on the AMSOIL case. So we're ready for a test. Again, the fixer grease, Power Up, doesn't get any credit for those either. So far it's a tie. We've even got one more on it. Seems to be hanging in there all right. Let's see how more we can do. If we just imagine that the AMSOIL should have got credit for one weight, we've already put it on there. We put another one, we've doubled the amount of stress the AMSOIL can have. It's now 3 times stronger. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 times better. Again, I'd like to say that the grease is 20 times better than this AMSOIL grease. And the only way I can do that would be to convince you by looking at the wear scar. Even though it's not crashing, let's take it off and look and see how much wear we have with fixer grease compared to the wear scar. My cut now, and I'll move my camera. 2, 3, 4. In addition to high stress and shock loading, grease will oftentimes face other troublesome situations. One of the most common is high moisture content. Let's take this dish full of plain water and see just how it would work if we had severe contamination of the grease with water. So far we've been able to demonstrate that this grease is superior to handling high pressure or extreme pressure and shock loading. Let's see how it withstands water. Now running in a bath of water, and there seems to be no serious grinding or other ill effects. You can certainly see the smoke coming off of it, illustrating also that the fixer grease is able to withstand high temperatures and severe water contamination. Let's take a look and see how much wear we've experienced in this environment.